going to start with the easiest version of Quilt as you go. So if you've never done this before and you don't feel very confident, then this is the way to start. And what I've got is I've got some strips of fabric, and these are all different widths. These actually come from jelly rolls, bits that I've got left over from other projects, and I've got all sorts of different colours, and I've pressed them and given them a good iron so that I know that they're nice and flat. They're all, I've cut my piece of batting and I'm using scrim foam headliner because that's something that I have a lot of as a bag maker, and I've cut it bigger than the pattern pattern piece that I'm using. I'm doing the short version, so this is approximately 1/2 inch all the way around bigger than the pattern piece that I've got for this piece, and I've cut it in a rectangle because I want to use the sides of the rectangle to actually keep my pieces straight, because I'm not going to measure. So I am going to start at one end. Now all of these strips are taller. This is about 7 inches from top to bottom. The actual pattern piece is only 6 inches from top to bottom. So all of my pieces, all my bits of fabric are longer than the batting that I'm using. I can trim off the ends, it's not a problem. So I'm just going to start by placing, let me just get rid of my bag of bits because that's going to get knocked on the floor, and that's not what we need. I've just found another piece that I'm going to press because I want that colour. Now my pieces, my strips are all, they're none of them measured, they're left over from other things, but they're all between 3/4 of an inch and the full width of the jelly roll, which is 2.5 inches. Now you can do this with all of the same width if you want to. I like to variegate my width just because I think it looks interesting if you variegate it. Now my first piece I'm going to lay against one of the short ends, right sides up, and I'm going to just stitch down the very side of the foam, stitching that fabric to the foam, or your batting, whatever your batting is, using approximately a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just literally going to just trim off that end bit because that will bother me. So I've stitched that, it's now joined. I've done a line of stitching at 1/4 inch across there. Now I'm going to do another line of stitching, 1/4 inch from my original line of stitching. It doesn't have to be 1/4 inch, it doesn't even have to be straight lines. If you wanted to do swirly lines, that's fine. And then I'm going to do another line of stitching, another 1/4 inch away, until my piece of fabric is completely stitched to my backing fabric. So I've now got 3 lines of stitching, and you can't actually see that it's quilted on that. This white doesn't show very well. But our first piece of fabric is now fixed to our foam. So I'm now going to take my second piece of fabric, and my strips are all different sizes, so I like to have them different sizes just because I think it looks interesting. I'm going to take my piece of fabric and I'm going to lay it right sides down with one of the straight edges against the straight edge of the piece that's already on there. I'm just going to trim off that end bit before I even get going. So you can see it's actually sitting right on top, and I'm going to stitch across here to join them together, and I'm going to stitch across there at a 1/4 inch seam allowance or thereabouts. As long as I stitch in a straight line, it doesn't matter if I'm actually doing a 1/4 inch. I generally use the edge of my foot as a guide. So now our second piece of fabric is attached. What we're going to do is we're going to open that second piece of fabric up. Now if you want to get your iron and open that seam with your iron, you can do. I will admit that I invariably don't do that. I tend to just finger press it, and once you've got that piece on there and you've opened up that seam, I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away from that folded seam on the second piece of fabric. back stitching at the beginning and the end, so you can see it better on that I've got a line of stitching. I'm now going to do another couple of lines of stitching, each 1/4 inch away from the previous one. My stitch length is at about 3.5. I have a off-white coloured thread in here. I'm using a size 14 needle here. For any of the, this is the easiest one to do, and for all of these I use a size 14 needle, except for the crazy quilting, which you'll see later on, because that one tends to have a lot more layers, so I tend to go up to a size 16 needle at that point. So I'm going to take my next strip, my third strip, and I'm going to lay it right sides together with the edge against that piece that I've just put on, so against the second piece, so it's sitting right sides together with the second piece, and I'm going to stitch it down using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. What we're effectively creating here is stripes. I'm just going to trim off the end because I don't need that. Open it up, finger press, or use your iron. It kind of depends how carried away you get. I'm very good at, if I don't need to use the iron, then I probably won't. And again, I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away from that folded seam that we just created. And again, until that piece is fully secured. My batting. Now, do I want that greeny colour? I don't think I do. So we're going to go from there, we'll go to, what colour should we do next? Let's do greens, I think. So I have a piece of green. This one's a little bit narrower, probably only 3/4 inch. I think these ones are all 1 inch wide. But again, I'm going to lay it on top of that one that I've just laid, so against that last raw edge. And I'm going to stitch in place using the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Getting rid of the end. Open that seam up. I've got lots of little threads because these are scraps that have been sitting in a pot for ages, so they have started to fray a little bit. So I do have to kind of watch out for threads because they will drive me nuts. And you as well. Pressing that seam open, make sure it's nice and flat. I only get a couple of rows of stitching on this one because it's that bit narrower. So the first line of stitching is 1/4 inch away from that folded seam. This is an interesting one. I think this one, again, putting, now this is a batik, so it's difficult to tell which is the front and back because they look pretty much the same. And this is another narrow one, so my stripes were going to be random thicknesses, which I don't mind. Again, finger under. Open her up. thread where it's just frayed a little bit. And again, 1/4 inch away from the seam, the folded seam. You can do these random colours, you can do them alternate colours, you can do them whatever you want. I like a rainbow. I'm a huge fan of quilting when it's to do with rainbows, so that's pretty much what I'm going to do. I have another green piece of fabric, so I'm just going to lay that on. So that's the next piece, and that's right sides together with the previous piece. Stitching 1/4 inch from the edge to hold it in place. And you can see I haven't once measured anything. And this sort of quilting isn't really about perfection. It's about texture and colour and speed, really. This is quilting for those that don't want to spend the rest of their life measuring 1/4 inch seam allowances. Quilters are very partial to their seam allowances, and they're also very partial to precision. And whilst this can be done very precisely if you really want to, it doesn't suffer from not being done overly precisely. It looks great if you're more random with it. Let's put the next one on. So you're just lining up with the previous strip that you've actually already fastened on and stitched in place. You're lining up the raw edge of your new piece with the raw edge of the existing piece, and your panels are always going to be right sides together, other than that first panel which goes on right sides up. Now, I'm not going to press these because if I'm honest, I don't always press them. In fact, if I'm honest, I rarely press them. I finger press and hold those seams so that they're nice and tight. Because once you've done that first line of stitching, that seam will stay where it is. It isn't going to make a vast difference to the look of the finished quilting if you don't press. And I don't like wasting time doing things that I don't think are absolutely 100% necessary, especially if they involve an iron. And the next piece. A 1/4 inch seam allowance-ish. Sorry, if you're a quilter, you're probably turning purple now, going, ish. I will admit that I am actually a closet quilter as well, so I do understand that 1/4 inch seam allowances are really important if you want nice matching corners on things. However, we don't have any corners on this, so we don't need anything really to match. And this is about random quilting as opposed to the very precise stuff that you see in some of these beautiful quilts with sort of half square triangles and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm guilty of doing them, but this is much more my cup of tea because it's quick and it doesn't make my brain hurt thinking about it. I'm just going to trim off these extra bits that I've got here, and you can see we're starting to build sorry, the sun's come out there and it's suddenly we're starting to build a pretty looking quilt. What colour bits have I got? Yes, I think we'll go blue. I think I can probably afford to get rid of that bit because that's way, oh golly, the sun has come out. I'm not going to complain about it, but it does blind me. I hope you can see what I'm doing because the sun is shining on my table, which doesn't help. Just going to see if I can pull the curtain around a little bit. I don't imagine the sun will last for very long, it never does. Now we're running out of juice in the phone, so let me just plug that back in. Right. So I unfold that next piece and stitch down. Another blue bit, different print, but another blue. Now, if you're a person that buys jelly rolls for any reason, and I'm guilty of doing that, and I've never really understood why I buy them, I just like the colours, they kind of jump out at me. Jelly rolls are fabulous for this because all of the fabrics that you get in a jelly roll will be designed to be placed together, so they work really well. These that I'm using are the leftovers from a couple of Alison Glass jelly rolls and also some batik fabrics that I had. Not jelly rolls, they were fat quarters, but I just think the colours go nicely with them, and I think that the batik breaks up the Alison Glass because Alison Glass is so distinctive. The batik just gives a bit extra interest, I think, in my opinion only. You can see this is really quick. We're pretty much halfway across our panel. So let's go from there to, where should we go next? I think we might go pink, actually. So why did we cut our fleece bigger, or our batting bigger than the panel that we need? Basically, if you're quilting, as you quilt, your batting tends to shrink slightly. So if you were to cut your batting to the right size, the size that your panel is, you'd find when you get to the end, it's too small, which is really annoying. So we always cut it a little bit larger to allow for shrinkage. It's quite an interesting experiment, actually. If you measure how big your rectangle is before you quilt, and then how big it is after you've quilted, you'll find there's quite a big difference. Right, now I'm going to use a much wider strip now because I quite fancy having a bigger strip in the middle. And I'm starting to stitch from this end because I don't want to have loads up here tucked away and banging on my machine. So this, it makes no difference which end you stitch from, left or right, right or left. You could, if you wanted to, do this left to right as opposed to top to bottom. I just like top to bottom because I think it's more stripes, and I just think the more the merrier. Don't worry if it looks like it's going a little bit sort of skewy. That's all part of the charm, the quilt, as you go. It's not precise. It's not meant to be. It's much more like the sort of traditional American quilts that were very, very random and quilted from all sorts of different fabrics. Some onto a base a bit like this. Quilt as you go is not a new technique. But it wasn't done with a sewing machine back then. Right, we've got some, let's go for some orange now, shall we? I think I'm going to need a few more strips anyway, because I don't think I've got enough cut here. You can see we're just kind of carrying on, doing the same thing. It's quite repetitive. It builds quite quickly. And the finished effect is just really fun. Adding quilting also makes whatever you've used for your batting a lot more stable. It gives it more of more body, so it gives it more strength, which is ideal for a pouch because it gives it standy-uppiness. Is that a real word? Yes, it is. It certainly is in the bag making world. You wouldn't want a bag that falls over, would you? No. You want a bag that stands up, so it needs standy-uppiness. See if I can find some bits of different colours that I fancy to go into this. Right, what have we got here? Oh, that's a bit thin, I think. We've got some, don't seem to have that much in the way of reds, and I don't know why that is. Okay, that's red. I do think it's probably a little bit bold though. Yeah, I'm not sure about that one. I think we might just cut it down a little bit. Let's just press it first though. And I would say I would normally take it and use my rotary cutter and cut it down, but for this it doesn't actually matter that much, as long as it's pretty much. Okay, so we've got red. Let's see what else we have here. Oh, we've got some purples, that'll do. We have some purples, we like a bit of purple. Not a lot of purple. In fact, hardly any purple. Let's just... it's the purple one. I've got scrap bags all over the place. That's not going to work. Okay, let's see what we have got. We can work with that. Okay, so I've got some grey, so we can go down to a grey colour. Oh, and I've got some, oh, here we go, look at that, lovely. Okay, let's just press these, because these will do, I think. So that one's already pressed. Let's just press the grey. Didn't prepare very well, did I? Right, I think we can safely get rid of a bit of that one there, because I think having two thicker lines of the grey is going to look a bit OTT, so let's cut this one in half. So let's put the red one on. And then I think we've probably just about got enough. You will need to keep checking your bobbin thread while you're doing this, because this goes through quite a lot of bobbin thread. However, what I find is that I tend to put in, you know, all those bobbins that you have with that half full? You just think, why did I even, you know, why did I fill that up when I needed a little bit? I tend to use all those half full bobbins for this. So often there's random colours on the back, but the back you're not going to see, so it doesn't really matter. Let's go for the grey. Not convinced about this, but never mind. No, that's okay. I can live with that. As I say, I don't press most of the time. If you don't feel confident, or you prefer to, then please do. Don't feel that you have to copy me. Grey bit. Oh, it's not the last bit actually, we've got another bit to go on. Now sometimes when I see videos of this technique, and there's lots of videos out there, I see people, rather than stopping and starting, going back to the same side and stitching again to do these strips, I see people turning at the bottom and then going round. I've never had much success doing that because it tends to warp the fabric, and I just find that that doesn't work for me. If you prefer to do that rather than stopping and starting the way I am, then that's very, very much your call. I can feel where the batting finishes, so I'm just gonna doing my straight lines. Oh, looks like I've run out of bobbin thread, so let's yep. There we go. Let's just change it for a, actually that's an appropriate colour given the colour I've got on the machine. I think it was brown before because I happen to have a bobbin full of brown. Right, there we go. Now I can just trim off all the excess from the outside here. Now your pattern piece tells you to cut your exterior panels on the fold. That is not what you're going to do. I will explain to you what we're going to do, and I probably won't actually show you it on the camera because I don't think anybody needs to be shown how to cut a rectangle. But you have the measurements for each of the panels on each of the different size pouches written on the pattern piece. This one is 14 inches by 6, the complete square, a complete rectangle. It doesn't take into account these cutouts. So I'm going to take this, that I know it was just a little bit bigger than 14 by 6 because I made sure it was bigger than 14 by 6, knowing that that's the size of my finished panel. I'm going to take this and I'm going to cut it down to 14 by 6. And I'll come back to you in a second and show you then how we cut the squares out of the bottom. Okay, so I've cut my quilted panel. Doesn't that look fab? Down to 14 by 6, which is the size of the pattern piece. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to pop my pattern piece on top of my quilted panel. If you're not, if you've got pins, you can pin it. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I don't use pins for anything if I can help it, because I tend to stab myself and then bleed everywhere. And then you can cut out those cutouts from the bottom, or you can use your rotary cutter if it suits you. Quite easily with a pair of scissors. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. I'm just turning my pattern piece over. I'm going to pin or clip the pattern piece to your fabric to make sure it's exactly where it needs to be. And there we are. Our first, that's easy quilt as you go. And that's our first panel done. Now you can make the back using the exact same technique, or you can use, I'm going to show you shortly the log cabin effect, which is the same as this one. So it's kind of working around a central square, or I'll show you in a little while how to do that one. That's much more random, and that's much more for the advanced stitches amongst you. So, but it's very much your call. Have a go. So I'll come back shortly and show you how to do the log cabin.